My name is Peter Tyler, and I'm the professor of, I can never remember what I'm a professor of Pastoral Theology and Spirituality here at St. Mary's. And rightly so, the Bakita Centre has been centre for this conference, but it is also a joint venture with the centre that I head at St. Mary's called Inspire, the centre, again, I can never remember the title, Centre for Initiatives in Spirituality and Reconciliation. And we founded the centre 10 years ago here at St. Mary's, really in response to what the Archbishop was just talking about, this crisis of meaning and hope, as he put it just now. And in the centre, we aim to seek reconciliation through spirituality on three levels. And in a way, it's reflected very nicely in our panel this morning. The first level we seek reconciliation is intrapersonally, in particular around the psychological and the meaning of our existence. And to that end, we've done a number of series of events on mental health and well-being. And I'll introduce him formally in a moment. So in that respect, it's great that we've got Dr. Papadopoulos here online with us today. The second level is that we practice reconciliation between individuals and different communities. And again, in this respect, it's great to be joined by Luke de Pulford and to hear about his work this morning, which I'll introduce again formally in a moment. And finally, we seek reconciliation on a universal level, which is why I jumped at this chance to not only work with my old friends in the Orthodox community, a very deep, and I was asked last night whether I was considering becoming an Orthodox. I have thought about it, but it's very tempting, but it's a very deep relationship for me that's meant a lot over the years. And to hear the talk that we just had, the Archbishop really gives you the sense of fire that lies at the heart of Orthodoxy. You know, and if you read the stories of the saints in Orthodoxy, there's a lot of fire around, and I think we saw that fire incarnated this morning in the Archbishop's talk. And in this sense of universal reconciliation, I think this does take on board this modern curse of slavery, people trafficking. And in this respect, it very much embraces the work of Sister Maria, Luisa, and Anna, whose work we're going to hear more about in a moment. Sorry about the plug, but this is the only chance I get to talk about it. As well as academic conferences, as the Archbishop reminded us, it's not just about being academic. We seek research, resource, and realization, although we do academic courses. Latterly, we've just started a doctorate in ministry and an MA in Christian spirituality. Okay, that's the plug over. Now we move on to our first speaker of the morning, who is Dr. Renos Papadopoulos of the University of Essex. Here he holds a number of roles. He has a chair in analytical psychology there, and he is director of the Centre for Trauma, Asylum and Refugees. So it's eminently suitable to be talking to us today. And this includes a postgraduate program in refugee care. He's also a member there of the Human Rights Centre and the Transitional Justice Network and the Armed Conflict Crisis Hub. He's also an honorary clinical psychologist and systemic family psychotherapist at the world-famous Tavistock Clinic in London. He's professor of psychology and Christian ministry at the Antiochian House of Studies in the States, and he's a practicing clinical psychologist, family therapist, and Jungian psychoanalyst. I don't know many people who have all three of those. That's quite remarkable. He is a consultant to numerous organizations and has worked extensively with refugees, tortured persons, trafficked peoples, and other survivors of political violence and disasters in many countries. Please put your hands together to welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this remarkable event. I feel very humbled to be among such eminent speakers and participants. And honestly, after the inspiring presentation by the Archbishop this morning, I would have wanted instead to sort of sit and meditate on that rather than me saying anything in addition to that. But nevertheless, thank you for inviting me, and I want to share some of my own thinking and some of my own work and approach to these perspectives. Essentially, what I want to do is present a framework. And of course, in 20 minutes is virtually impossible to do that. I will try to introduce some key elements of this framework, a framework of how we conceptualize these issues, because my argument is a lot of difficulties arise from the beginning in terms of how we conceptualize things before even we start thinking and planning and doing anything. So my title is Therapeutic Care, which I will discuss what I mean by that in the context of modern slavery. And my key emphasis is on discerning different discourses. So we have talked already yesterday and today about this particular sinister form of human exploitation that includes human trafficking, forced labor, modern slavery. They are all entangled. And we all know that they take different forms. One of the things that hasn't actually been mentioned very much is the organ theft or organ even donation, because I've come across a lot of refugees, migrants who, in order to survive, they donate their organs, and of course some people trade in that, and that's a particularly horrible form of slavery of a different nature. So the impact, as we know, is quite considerable. It evokes a lot of disgust, really, a lot of fear, a lot of anger. So my point is that the nature of these events and their impact create an overwhelming impact, an overwhelming response. We are overwhelmed by all of that. That is too much. The enormity, the complexity, the destructiveness, the inhumanity, and the fact that the majority of all of that, particularly in relation to human slavery, is largely hidden. So what does that mean when we're overwhelmed? I put this as a kind of, I like this kind of graphic representation, sort of, like a big dark cloud that descends on us. It's overwhelming because the events and the whole phenomena, all the phenomena are emotionally charged. And also there are many pressing needs now. So the whole of that cluster is particularly toxic. Yet, as human beings, we have an unrelenting need to understand. We need to grasp something. We cannot just say, oh, it's just too complex, it's too overwhelming. And inevitably what we do is that we tend to oversimplify, polarize, in fact, destroy complexity. Life is complexity. And the easiest form, the most common form of oversimplification is polarization. Hence, the field is ridden by polarized positions. Victims, perpetrators. These are clear victims, these are clear perpetrators. Are they? This is a sharp polarization, I would argue, in order to sort of make us understand clearly, sort of get a kind of a foothold in this realm of complex and powerfully emotionally charged phenomena. Another is, more complex. Are perpetrators monsters, or are perpetrators also victims? Again, sharp polarization. Another polarization, which is much more evident in most efforts to help people, is are these resilient survivors, or are these traumatized victims? As if there aren't many shades in between. But usually we say this is a victim, or this is a survivor. And then, of course, that impacts on us, because then we say, oh, we're omnipotent, we can do everything, or we're going to the other extreme. It's too much, it's beyond us, we can do nothing, we're impotent. So my argument is that this polarization is a product of the overwhelmingness of the phenomena we're dealing with. And let's look at it more specifically. Ordinarily, when we are dealing with any phenomena, we consider and process, consciously or non-consciously, all aspects of the situation, positive and negative. However, when we are overwhelmed, I would argue that our processing becomes impaired, defective. And what are the consequences of that? Not only we oversimplify and polarize, not only we lack complexity, but we also develop misassociations. Here are the conspiracy theories. In other words, there is some truth, or perhaps not truth, but exaggerated or false and inappropriately exaggerated links, etc. But they give a sense of a person that now we understand, and we're not so lost, we're not so overwhelmed. Overwhelmed means we're flooded, we cannot survive, we need to get up and sort of, keep our head above water, as we say. In effect, under the influence of these overwhelmed phenomena, we tend to distort reality. And of course, if we distort reality, it's very difficult to plan and act effectively. Another specific, what I would call epistemological error, in other words, how we conceptualize things when we're overwhelmed, is the confusion between events and the experience of the events. Very obvious, very simple, very understandable. Yet the implications of that are far more. They have many more far implications that we cannot even imagine. Let's try with this. We all know about the pandemic. I'm giving you an example to sort of make it simpler. The pandemic is bad. There's no question about that. The pandemic has killed a lot of your friends and my friends. It has ruined business. It has prevented me from being with you today. Due to health reasons, I am not allowed to travel and be in open spaces, etc. The pandemic is bad. There is no question about that. Nevertheless, wait a minute. If we say because the pandemic is bad, everything is bad connected with pandemic, that is epistemologically and pragmatically incorrect. Because if we do not focus on the specificities and the uniqueness of people, then we just miss the whole picture. We distort reality. When we look at specifically the impact that the pandemic has on people, let's be real. I mean, I live in this part of London for the last 40 years, okay? I know a lot of people here. We have some friends, etc., etc. When the pandemic came, some young professionals in the neighborhood developed a WhatsApp group in order to help people to do some shopping for the elderly, etc. That has continued. And now for gardening, if anybody wants to do any any gardening, asks whether somebody has any gardening tool that they can borrow. Somebody does fig preserves, they gives to others. The pandemic has created a new sense of community. That is positive. The pandemic is negative. Catch that. This is the difficulty. If we think that everything negative has only negative effects, we miss something, and we can do violence along the way. And I'm thinking, of course, immediately about slavery. So you can expand that. I mean, in terms of the organizations and in terms of families, during the pandemic, I'm sure that you connected with long lost friends, and you were able to do Zooms, etc., with people that you didn't, that you were not in touch with for a long time. What I'm saying is that if we do not look at the specifics of the specific complexity of that particular person, of that family, of that organization, all we say is just we brush everything. Pandemic is negative, everything is negative, and we miss some positive things there. So this is what I'm saying. If we focus only on the negative effects, we distort reality, which also includes non-negative effects. Another epistemological error when we're overwhelmed is a very simple one, cause and effect. Yes, adversity, it's a further development of what we said earlier. Adversity, devastating events create bad things. Yes, but as we say, it's not just only bad things. Look, I mean, I don't know. We're not a piece of things. We're human beings. A cause and event, a cause and effect, it's here. If I apply some pressure here, I'm going to break it. If I apply pressure on a person, well, it depends. There are so many other factors, and that is the issue. So it's not so simple. So we have a constructed response. And what we have is what I call meaning attribution processes. We have, what are these? We all know about these. There are nothing, there are hundreds of these issues. It depends on personal characteristics, relational characteristics, gender, age, race, disability, power position, the specificities of the circumstances, the set meaning systems that they are used to account for the events and the experience of the events. I work in different parts of the world. You hear often people say it was Allah's will. That's how they experience that form of adversity. It was Allah's will. Or Allah is trying me, or whatever. That is the way they experience it. And not only about the past, hope, current conditions, future prospects, wider societal discourses, all these affect the way we experience events. Yet, if we think of in a crude way in terms of cause and effect, bad event, all effects are negative and necessarily bad, then we get into trouble. In order to avoid that, over the years, I developed this adversity grid that is used extremely widely in many UN agencies and in many other places. That basically helps us to discern, to differentiate between at least 3 groups of consequences when we're exposed to any form of adversity. Yes, the negative are there. The negative are there. You can see the left column here. Here is the negative effects. But come on, we all know that a lot of unchanged things remain a person. Not everything is negative. Some people still retain their values, still retain their sensitivities, certain values. And if we just brush everybody that, they are all traumatized because of this, then we miss the specificities of those particular people, of those particular families, of those communities. So here we have the different levels, individual families, etc. And here we have the 3 different columns of consequences. The negative are there, but again, in terms of differentiation and to counteract oversimplification, is advisable to look at even some gradations of how negative it is. The fact that, I don't know, you cannot do one thing is not the same, is not of the same gravity as doing something else. So we need to, for example, if somebody develops a psychiatric disorder, is different from just feeling some discomfort. So we need to even differentiate the degree of severity of these negative ones. When we're looking at the unchanged ones, this is what I call resilience, the positive unchanged. In other words, positive qualities, strengths, resources that existed in a person that are retained regardless of their exposure to adversity. I know that there are many different definitions of resilience, and I get lost. They are mostly idealistic sort of exaltations of idealized states. Here I'm talking in an operational way, what specific strengths a person or a family or an organization had before their exposure to adversity and have been able to retain it. Those are resilient functions. And then we have the most exciting part, what I call adversity activated development, which is, yes, because people have been exposed to adversity, they have developed some new strengths. And we all know in all languages, in all cultures, there is the saying that whatever you don't, whatever does not kill you strengthens you, and that's a fact. Whatever does not kill you strengthens you. In other words, insofar as you have survived, however you have survived, you have also learned something from that, and it has also strengthened you in some way. Where is that in our systems of help of those who are suffering from various forms of adversity, and specifically in terms of slavery? So this is what I'm saying, that resilience for me refers to the existing positive qualities, characteristics, behaviors, functioning, relationships that were retained from before the adversity. That is, they survived the exposure to adversity, whereas adversity-activated development refers to new positive qualities that did not exist before, characteristics, behaviors, functioning, relationships that did not exist before the exposure to adversity and were acquired as a result of the exposure to adversity. Just look at this. I was looking just the other day, preparing for this. The Trafficking in Persons report of the US State Department, 2021. Just look at this. This is not a sophisticated discourse analysis, but the word victim appears 12,779 times. And the word survivor 250, the word vulnerability so many times, and the word resilience 4 times. And you know what? None is about the resilience of the people that they're helping, but it's about how to build resilience for them, as if they have no resilience themselves. One of the first things that in the trainings that I offer, I ask my trainees to ask themselves, if they were to be in the position of the person that they're trying to help, would they have survived, first of all, or would they have survived it in a better way? Once you ask that question, you develop some humility, because you see in front of you also, yes, a person who is suffering, but also somebody with a unique specimen of human resilience. You see the human spirit there. And more, an earlier version of the same report in 2004 says survivors often suffer multiple traumas and psychological scarring from the violence and brutality they experienced. Okay, we understand that. Their development as a person is often irreparably damaged. Why? Why this kind of doom and gloom scenario, of course, we know, in order to mobilize support. But what are we doing? Are we trying to pathologize those in order to, those who want to help in order to help them? In this framework, the important thing is to differentiate. So I differentiate two forms of dehumanization. The negative dehumanization is the one that we know is, all these forms of human exploitation, etc. But what is a positive dehumanization? Well, I would call it positive dehumanization when we actually try to pathologize those we want to help and say, help them because they're vulnerable. No, help them because they're human beings. Help them because they're human beings. And there are God's creatures, and they have human dignity, not because of pity them, because they are traumatized and they are vulnerable. There is a subtle but important difference in how we view things and how we position ourselves. Related to that is another important distinction between distress and disorder. Yes, distress refers to the normal responses to abnormal circumstances all of us experience all the time. But please, disorder is something else. Disorder, especially when we're talking about psychiatric disorders, is not just simply a distressful reaction. We're talking about abnormal response to abnormal circumstances that go beyond the appropriate time, context, and circumstances. Now, we don't have time to go into many details, but I'm really alarmed by the popularization of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Please, that's a D. D means a psychiatric disorder. It's not just simply a distressful reaction. It's a disorder. Anyway, people use that very glibly. Oh, we're suffering from PTSD. No, a psychiatric disorder is serious dysfunctionality, because we don't make a distinction between the different gradations of the negative impact of adversity. Another important distinction between people being victims of adversity, which they are de facto. This is the inevitable outcome of being exposed to adversity. Somebody, we can say, in language is correct to say that they are victims of earthquake, victims of slavery, victims of famine, victims, etc. They are victims of that adversity. But in our construction and interaction with people, we develop, and we need to be very careful, victim identities. And that's not the same as people are victims. We're using the same words. And there is the difficulty because, for example, when it comes to legal situations, you need to identify yourself as victim. I mean, in Colombia, I've been working, with, they have a whole department for unit for the victims. So you have a certificate that you are a victim, and that entitles you to certain benefits. So there is a benefit to be a victim, but let's be careful because, the victim identity inevitably also implies lack of responsibility, passivity, inappropriate dependence and entitlement, disempowers, and develops what we refer to as learned helplessness. So we teach people how to be helpless. That's not helpful. Also, I make another distinction between doing psychotherapy, which needs to be done by appropriately trained therapists, for people who suffer from psychological problems and applying psychological techniques, from being therapeutic. And I think it's important to make that distinction, because being therapeutic means attending to the complexity and uniqueness of those who are interacting with, and anybody can be therapeutic. The church is therapeutic. We're therapeutic to our neighbors. We need to make that distinction and understand what that includes. Of course, I'm talking about a general outline here and a framework. I cannot go into details. What I want to end is with this. I say that adversity survivors also, at a certain point, they are philosophers. Because, yes, if they say, I lost this and I lost that and I lost that, yes, they will be saying that. And I suffer from this and I suffer from that, yes, they say that. But if we create space, all of them, they will also move on and say things like, why me? Why me? And then they're sort of asking questions like, why a neighbor of mine who we grew up together all of a sudden did this to me? How can people be so cruel? Please, these are philosophical questions, or if you wish, theological questions. They're asking about human nature. They're asking about human values. And under severe forms of adversity, we see that people find God or lose God. I would say lose God if their understanding of God was inappropriate. But these are important ontological times for people. And we need to take that seriously and not to see it only in terms of mental health and using techniques. And that's why I'm talking about these two languages. I find that very useful to talk about two languages. One is the language of damage and repair. Yes, they suffer from certain things and we can help them. But also we need to be careful because that develops a victim identity. But also we should not forget that what this philosophical language that they also have, we need to learn that language to interact with them. And that's difficult. That's very difficult. Because we know as mental health professionals how to apply techniques. But what do we do when they talk to us about why me? What do we know? How can we deal with that? We say, well, first of all, we need to validate that. We need to validate that. Because if we just pathologize that, we lost an opportunity because there, in this language of what I call nostalgic incomprehensibility, or this philosophical language, they say, I don't understand, doctor. Why has that happened to me? Why did they do this to me? Why did they do this to my daughter? I can't understand that. This incomprehensibility, this pain, includes there a creative and transformational potentiality. In other words, what they are saying is that my existing framework cannot grasp that. And they have some openness there. And that's where we can come in. But you see, we're professionals. We're not pastors. And then we can either validate that and refer them to their priests, to their imams, etc. But at least to validate that yes, it's human to ask that. And not to sort of bring it back to the pathology. And when we do that, we help them realize that, we know this from Romans, where sin abounds, grace abounds much more. These are not just flowery words. These are not just flowery words. In Greek, hyperperisseusen η χάρις. We're talking about overflowing the grace. And wherever, I've been going for so many years in so many missions or projects all over the world in so many places, horrific, etc., etc. Everywhere, you will find also some examples of incredible sense of human magnanimity. You will find self-sacrifice. You will find purity of love. Where there is all of that destruction and all of that adversity. But if we don't look for that, if we don't have a framework that says that also exists, look for that, we're not going to see it, because all we see is just the suffering and the negative and the trauma and nothing else. But if we allow ourselves to expand that and connect with the grace that can also be there, that grace is one word, all these other wonderful things that we can be exposed to, and they can be exposed to the people that we're working with. And our work is fairly barren. But if we do that, it can be quite enriched, and it helps us with some deep humility, and that enables us then to connect with our brother. Thank you very much.
Well, Dr. Papadopoulos, you certainly have lived up to the first talk given by the Archbishop, and you've given us a wonderful embarrassment of riches there. And I particularly liked your distinction between two levels of language, between the one of victim identity, damage and repair, and the other one of this philosophical approach, and the distinction you made between doing therapy and being therapy. We'll move now to our next speaker, and that is Luke de Pulford. He is the director of Arise, which he co-founded with John Studzinski. Arise works to prevent slavery and trafficking in countries of origin around the world. It now has field staff in 4 continents. If that wasn't enough work for him, he is also founder of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, a coalition of more than 200 legislators from 20 legislatures seeking to reform the approach of the democratic countries towards China. In this respect, in 2019, he was made a Fellow of Hong Kong Watch, and in the same year, co-founded the Coalition for Genocide Response. He is a trustee of the Hong Kong Assistance and Resettlement Community and is a commissioner in the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. And here at St. Mary's, I'm proud to say that we've had a long association with the Tibetan communities in exile. I personally have had that, so it's a delight to welcome you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you particularly to Dr. Carol Murphy for the kind invitation. We're all so admiring of your work. And it's a privilege to follow Dr. Papadopoulos. Like you, found that exceptionally rich. Look, before beginning, I want to pay tribute to a man who I feel sure was known to some of the people in this room and a great friend of the modern abolition movement, Sir David Amos Mp, who was brutally murdered yesterday while doing his job. David was an extremely faithful and long-serving MP, a faithful Catholic to the end. I met him first about 13 years ago when I first started working in Parliament. He never shied from an unpopular cause if he believed it was right. He never bent to political fashions. He stuck with his convictions, and sometimes that cost him a lot. I'm going to tell you a story briefly, because I remember it like it was yesterday. It was 2011, and we'd invited the Speaker of the Supreme People's Assembly of North Korea to Parliament. The Foreign Office didn't want anything to do with this, so we ended up doing it. And, everybody was walking on eggshells. This guy was basically a very difficult man. His name was Chae Bok. Until David arrived, that is, because he walked straight up to this octogenarian tyrant and pointed at his red Kim Jong-il badge and demanded to be given it as a souvenir. It was certainly one way of breaking the ice. He was a friend to so many, and the marginalized, his colleagues, his constituents, and to young pretenders like me trying to learn the ropes. We'll miss him, and may he rest in peace. So the theme of this panel is trauma and pastoral support, fitting under this broader rubric of healing. I have to say that having spent 6 years or a bit longer close to the wounds inflicted by slavery and trafficking, I really don't know what healing looks like. And I'm grateful to Dr. Papadopoulos for that exposition of how overwhelming these wounds might be. In the world of development, we seem to labor under the illusion that providing a service and healing are concomitant or like the same thing. This is emphatically untrue. As Henri Norm said, this is a quote, "Nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds so we don't have to be embarrassed, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others. Don't worry, I'm not about to embark on a quasi-theological lecture here. I'm not qualified to do so apart from anything else, but no one puts his finger on something which knits together what I want to talk about today, which is how the conceptual difference in the way that Catholic sisters view suffering and healing informs their approach to anti-slavery work and why we stand to learn from it. So I want to talk about sisters, and apologies in advance to the sisters on the panel and in the room for going where angels fear to tread on that one. I haven't introduced Arise much yet. We're a charity which, though we're not faith-based ourselves, work extensively with religious sisters around the world. In India, the Philippines, Nigeria, and Eastern Europe, we've endeavoured to draw alongside networks of religious life, helping to support them in whatever way we think they need. We've also tried to study their work, believing that there are lessons to be drawn for the wider anti-slavery movement. And I also want to happily acknowledge the presence of our Chair of Trustees, Trixie Bennett-Shawholtz, here with us today. So back to healing. Look, I think it's fair to say that in Catholic thought, healing is not the absence of suffering. It's not the attempted eradication of a wound. Rather, it's learning to live with the effects of a wound and allowing it to be transfigured, a transfiguration which isn't a repudiation of that suffering, which may never cease, but an indication of the fact that some of the greatest and most beautiful gifts are wrought through that pain. So in this understanding, serving someone while they're healing isn't just about sticking around for the duration of a service. It's necessarily a long-term undertaking, rooted in loving relationship and everything that entails: trust, unconditionality, long-term accompaniment. And I'm going to come back to these concepts in a moment. In this world of being with, which is a rich theological term often used by sisters to describe them, those who are suffering are accompanied. Accompaniment is its own end in this world. Accompaniment is its own impact. Accompaniment is its own outcome. Sisters aren't accompanying people to hit impact metrics or to chalk up tallies which make their reports to donor agencies look better. They're seeking to meet the person in front of them on their own terms and to serve them. But this presentation isn't a love letter to religious sisters, but it kind of is actually. What I've said about trust, unconditionality, accompaniment, are notions that Arise has sought to test scientifically to understand the matter with a view to shedding light on whether or not this is just ephemeral nonsense or whether or not it actually means something. And if it does, what difference does it actually make to their work? Can we measure it? Does it make a difference to the processes of healing, however we might define it? And further, what's the learning for the broader community? And so, Arise has worked to commission research to probe precisely these questions, particularly the relationship between trust and slavery prevalence. What this notion of accompaniment might mean, what unconditionality might mean in the context of anti-slavery service provision. So I want to briefly drill into two pieces of research that we've commissioned, which I think are relevant to this discussion. So the first one is this. It's a partnership between Arise, a guy called Professor Kevin Bales, very well-known anti-slavery academic, Dr. Bidisha Saikia, and the Templeton Religion Trust, who funded it. The project is called The Pro-Social Benefits of Religion in Anti-Slavery Work and has two limbs. One is to try to assess or to research Islamic anti-slavery work, and the other is to try to study the work of sisters. So for the sisters bit, which is our brief, we commissioned an ethnographer, Bidisha, to go and live with a group of sisters in northeast India, Assam. She lived in the community for about 6 months, and her job was to test several hypotheses, which we'd drawn together based upon our work with sisters around the world to date. We hypothesized that the following were distinctive. And now I'm going to drill down into these, it's quite long, bear with me. Hypothesis 1, sisters are uniquely or unusually embedded in the communities that they serve. So unlike nearly all other forms of anti-slavery intervention, religious sisters live closely and often continuously within the communities that they seek to help. They often take on the same risks. And as a brief aside, this often goes alongside longevity. Sisters often make multi-generational commitments to a community. This is highly unusual in the anti-slavery space. Hypothesis 2. Their work is characterized, we believe, by a spirit of unconditional loving accompaniment, which means, this is a broad and loose definition really, that religious sisters prioritize the needs of the individuals they're working to support rather than focusing on how well or how poorly they might fit into project criteria. Religious sisters often describe this as walking with or being with, as I spoke about before, as they attempt to adopt much the same life often as many members of the community they're supporting. So put simply, and in the words often used by sisters, they see the greatest priority here as love gratuitously offered, expressed as service, but in our analysis, generative of trust upon which a foundation of change can and often is built. Right, hypothesis 3. There is often what I'm going to call in a really wordy way, an antipathy to a reductive understanding of impact. Antipathy to a reductive understanding of impact. What do I mean by that? So we sort of suspect, and we sought to test through this study, whether there was either an inability or an unwillingness to participate in the log frame driven impact agenda world of anti-slavery NGO maintenance. It governs a lot of the direction of much of the development of human rights work on the ground. We wanted to work out whether or not that might actually make the work of sisters better, less conditional, more flexible, less dictated by the categories and the will of funding agencies and our human rights community, which so often undulates and goes with the fads and fashions of whatever seems to be in the minds of DFID or the State Department. DFID doesn't exist anymore. Fourth hypothesis, commitment to human dignity, which might not need saying, but it is a fundamental difference. It's the theological underpinning and core driver of this work and the institutions to which they belong. A fifth hypothesis, and this is about trust, and this is, for me, in some ways, the most important bit. We hypothesized that sisters would build trust, generate trust more quickly with service users. We expected to find that this was due in part to their accompaniment model, which, when it's offered as its own goal and own outcome, is very often generative of trust. Conversely, where accompaniment is not consciously pursued by an organization, there'll be a greater sense that the help available is conditional or contingent upon progression or satisfaction of some status on the part of the client. Similarly, we expected to find that sisters would be able to break down barriers between themselves and exploited persons with greater speed, as well as barriers between exploited persons and very often civil authority. And there are loads of reasons for that. I don't think I've got time to go into it. So next hypothesis, that this pastoral role affords sisters greater access to sites of exploitation. That's actually fairly quantitatively demonstrated. So for example, in India, we did a study of the brothels in Delhi. The sisters had access to 63 out of 73 of those. And comparatively, a lot of the anti-slavery organizations worked there couldn't get into them. And the reason wasn't that the people running the brothels liked the sisters. It's because they were offering a pastoral service. They weren't seen as somebody or people who were there to investigate them. They were there to try to offer help to people, which wasn't necessarily going to lead on to difficulty for those people. So much greater access. And finally, this last hypothesis, that sisters would be less tethered to the kind of business and development side of running a charity, and that would enable them to pursue a more collaborative approach. Those of us who run anti-slavery NGOs know that we're all competing for the same funding. And it means that often, very unfortunately, that mitigates against the kind of collaboration that we ought to be seeing in the anti-slavery movement. Sisters kind of don't have that, partly because they don't have any money, but also because they're not that invested in the bureaucracy of NGO maintenance in the way that the rest of us have to be. So that's a lot of hypotheses. and thank you for bearing with that. The results of this research are just coming in. The fieldwork having concluded literally a month ago. And I don't want to spoil the amazing work of Bidisha Saikia, who's done fantastic work out there. But the upshot is that the hypothesis seem, with some qualifications, to hold. And again, this isn't to lionize the work of systems. But in the words of Professor Kevin Bales, who's leading the project, if there is a secret source to the way that sisters offer services, we have to learn from it. And I think there is in this an implied critique of the general culture of anti-slavery service provision to be teased out from this research. And it's all relevant to how we collectively seek to promote healing, however you choose to define it. So that's the first bit of research. Thank you for bearing with me. The second piece I want to highlight, we have called Trust and Liberation, and it's led by a guy called Professor Monti, who's the guy who produced the 2016 Global Slavery Index. He's very much a numbers guy. The idea was to work out whether or not there is a quantitative relationship, a correlation between trust and slavery that we could study. And we wanted to base that really on the hypothesis above, that actually trust matters in the context of anti-slavery services. So in this research, we developed an empirical model, and we found that trust is a statistically significant predictor, certainly in understanding the Trafficking in Persons report rankings over a 13-year time period. But we also found similar results using different measures of human trafficking, including that snapshot of data from the 2016 Global Slavery Index. I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm just going to say there is one aspect of this research that I think is particularly powerful, the Bertelsmann Shifting Transformation Index, which is an index of trust. We correlated that with the 2016 Global Slavery Index. And the results are really striking. You know, a 1 unit increase in trust on that scale predicts with a very, very high degree of reliability, a 16% decrease in exploitation in whatever region you're studying. 1% increase in trust, 16% decrease in slavery. So summarizing it and trying to strip it of all the jargon, trust is kind of kryptonite to slavery. You know, where you have more trust, you seem to have less slavery, or at least this is the beginning of an exciting, I think quite new research agenda. And we're doing it because we want to try to address the issue of this exceptionally reductive understanding of impact that we all labor under in the anti-slavery movement, obsessed by numbers and the people that we can get in and out of shelters and in and out of services, as opposed to the stuff which makes it hang together. You know, trust, accompaniment, precisely the sorts of things that we believe sisters exemplify. Now, Arise is a small charity. We're just testing some ideas we think are important, and we need many more people on this bandwagon. Because if it's true that the work of sisters is efficacious, but in a different way, a way that doesn't fit into this very reductive understanding of impact, which is just so numbers-driven and unrealistic about the daunting and long-term challenges of healing, then it's us, not sisters, that need to change. Us. We shouldn't be seeking to turn them into little NGOs, churning out numbers that make the donors feel happy. We should be working to find models that are capable of capturing the complexity of their work. And Dr. Papadopoulos, again, this oversimplification that predominates in our world of impact, we need to get rid of it, sweep it aside, and that's only going to happen if the research consensus moves. Now, don't get me wrong, and I'm very sorry, sisters aren't perfect. Lord knows their structures can be very challenging indeed to work with. As an external organization, honoring their vocational choices, their vocational priority can be really frustrating. But there is clearly something that we are missing here in not giving them their rightful voice at the table. So back to healing. If healing is ever possible, it can only be possible, I believe, in a trusting environment, in an accompanied environment, and with love, ideally, surrounded by a spirit of unconditionality. These are principles that are all too absent from the public discourse around healing and modern slavery. We think Arise thinks that these principles are exemplified by the sacrificial lives of religious sisters around the world. As a secular charity, we can proudly and unashamedly shout from the rooftops. The time to listen to these remarkable women and learn from their witness is long, long overdue. So we're going to be working to encourage the development and human rights communities and everybody else who will listen, politicians, you name it, to broaden their understanding and appreciation of work like this. And we'd love to link arms with all of you in that endeavour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke. That was a wonderfully inspiring presentation that really brought Dr. Papadopoulos' ideas into the reality of work today. And as it happened, we have a religious sister to listen to next. And a nice thing about today, when we were planning this conference, I personally wasn't aware of your work, but when we were planning this conference, very early on, we realized that we had to bring in quite a lot of religious sisters into the conference because their work is so vital. So I think your research has been demonstrated in the way we formed the conference. Sister Maria Luisa Polizzi is a native of Sicily, and she's presently living in Spain. She's an Adora sister, and she's currently Director General of the Amaranta Foundation. Her extensive experience with trafficked women began many years ago in Rome before she joined the congregation. And the world of migration and refugees has always been at the centre of her studies and interests. She has worked for the International Organization for Migration in Rome and Geneva. And once she joined the congregation, she has always lived in communities with trafficked women in different countries. She's known different projects of the congregation in different countries, and this has allowed her to speak with great authority about the reality of this world.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, and sorry for my English, but anyway, I'll try to do my best to let you understand what I'm saying. As Peter said, I'm Italian and now I'm based in Spain, but I would like to share with you like an overview of which is our work around the world as Sister Adora's Blessed Sacrament and Charity. And as our founder said, the word is for me a tabernacle. 3 words are important in our mission: inspiring, liberating, and transforming. And it's somehow interesting that I will be following Professor named Papadopoulos, and then Luke, speaking about sister. And also there was one sentence that the professor said that we help them because they are human beings, not because they are victims or this kind of stuff. You know, the word victim, I really don't like it. Maybe we should talk about resilient women. And in our work, which is our mission, because since the very beginning of our foundation, we were founded just to work with women in prostitution in 1856. So it means that it's 160 years working in this. So all over the world where we are always working with women in situation of exploitation or situation of vulnerability, and of course, trafficking and prostitution. In Europe, which is my experience, Italy, France, Spain, and then it's North Africa and Morocco, we are always working with women victims of trafficking. Most of them, they are migrants. So when we are talking about women, we should link migration, trafficking, prostitution. And although despite any political issues that we are in favor, we are not in favor, this is not the theme of my speech. It's just because I would like to say that we cannot separate sometimes the reason of migration with the situation that women or children are living in the country where they are. So sometimes we have to think about the situation where they come, of the country where they come from, then for a different approach when we are working with them. When we talk about these 3 words, inspiring, liberating, and transforming, it's because when we are with them, we really don't care which is their past. Of course, we use the past of the women because for maybe legal issues, try to work this psychological part of their weakness, but not because we are interested in this. Sometimes when we work with them, we at the very end of the history, till the very end of the time we are sharing in the shelters, we don't know exactly which is their life or which was their life, but we don't care about it. For me, it's the same if you are called Mary, Elizabeth, or whatever, if you are 18 or 19. This is important for the document, this is important for your future, this is important for your life. But at the very beginning, you are a woman or sometimes a younger just in front of us, and we have to take care of you. I would like to just say and read something that the women sometimes can say. One feels that with that life, with old men with whom I've been, nobody is going to value me for what I'm really. Then, as a woman, you feel defensive. When one comes from that world, the ones leave many scares. Being in the project has taken me out from being on the defensive, from thinking that everyone who approaches me is going to hurt me. Being here has enabled me to see myself in another way. So I think something very important that we can resume with the long history of audacity and killing. As our founder said, even if only for one, because sometimes people will ask us, why are you doing this? And also the question that Professor said, why me? Why did they do this to me? These are the questions that always are on the table in our shelters. Of course, the women asking themselves, why me? And sometimes when they say, why me? And the person that has trafficked her is someone that they know. So the trust, the self-confidence is always getting low. But 3 words are very important. Welcome, care, and recognition. Of course, as Pope Francis says today, that the past level is rooted in a nation of human person that allows him or her to be treated as an object. But if we talk about these 3 words, welcome, care, and recognition, the life of the women can change. And I will explain how these 3 words, welcome, care, and recognition, in our shelter or in our project, because of course we are now talking about shelters, but it's not a question of only residential shelter. We are also working in some, in the places like going to meet them or just welcoming them to our offices, but not living with them. But these 3 words are always important. And these 3 words are linked with other 3 words, which is love, encounter, and liberation. And why I say this? Because love is focused on welcome and recognition. Liberation, conceived as autonomy and self-fulfillment. Encounter, oriented to closeness, commitment, and generosity. Why do I say this? Because our pedagogy is a pedagogy of encounter, a space of will, a frame of trust and social reciprocity. Why do I say this? Because when women come to our shelter, we open our house and even ourselves to her, but she will also be open to learn something from us. So we learn from her and she learned from us. It's not because we are more than her. Only life is different. Unfortunately, we have never suffered what they suffer. Unfortunately, she passed through something that we will even cannot think about it. When they tell us how the migration process came, how could they arrive to Spain, for instance, walking to the desert, being days, night, alone, or with people that they don't know. And of course, they have to trust on someone to be alive, which is a tricky thing. Then they trust on those who will be then exploited. So, but at least they can save life. So this is something, I mean, when I think about this, or when they listen to them, it's crazy for me. But I learned from their passion. I learn from them to trust on the others. Many of them, when they come, they don't even understand our language, of course. They don't speak Spanish. They don't speak Italian, although they come from South America. But the culture is different. And we have to be together. Sometimes when we sit around the table, we are like 9 countries, 4 continents. It's interesting, even for them, to share with people coming from different countries and continents that life can be shared without anything in return. Because they are used to whatever they do, someone will pay for that. And they do it for granted, it's gratis. It's like how this can be. At the very beginning, they cannot understand that we are doing this because we want to help them, because they are human beings. And every one of us is entitled to live according to human rights. So they are even not aware that they are entitled of living according to the human rights. They don't even know this because they have the right to decide what to do in their life, not because someone will decide for them, but they are not entitled. They are not aware of this. And when we are trying to explain them that they don't have to be paid to do anything, they can choose. So why it's important is because in our shelter, in the way we are working with them, we do not decide for them. We just help them to decide. We just allow them to make the choice. I want to do this, I want to do that. And in case she failed, this is part of life, but at least she has decided to do. I think this is important when we are talking about freedom, because sometimes in even our work, maybe we can believe that we are working for them, we are doing something for them, but at the end, we will be deciding for them. This is not fair, because if we are talking about freedom, if we are talking about liberation, we cannot decide for them. They have to be free to do it. So when we are talking about welcome and recognition, autonomy and self-fulfillment, commitment and generosity, we are talking about all this, which is a process from the very beginning when they arrive in our places, whatever they are, till the end. And we cannot say it will be 1 day, 2 days, 1 year, 2 years. No, because there are so many factors involved. Age, language, culture, history, personal history of the person, So that's why it's a pedagogy of encounter. And of course, if we talk about transformation, relationship, encounter, we say that individual is a protagonist, belief in the possibility of change, inclusive and non-judgmental, confidentiality, personal and friendly attention, professionalism, shared responsibility, dignity and respect, and compassion. It's very important whether I'm saying, why I was saying that they have to be free to choose. That's why the women is in the center. So based person, our approach is a based person, in the center. And also the accompaniment that Luke was always saying, it's the most important thing, because through this accompaniment, she believes in the possibility of change, that she's not the history that she has lived to. She's any name we can put. So she can change. She has this possibility of change. So the life is giving her a second opportunity. And if she will be free to take it or not. It's very important that for them is to understand that whatever they share with us is under confidentiality, because they are not used with this. They don't trust on us. And they will say, oh, you are doing this for me? No, it's impossible. So day by day, step by step, they will see. So why Luke was saying that the system, we are there 24 hours because we share our houses with them. Since I entered the congregation, I was living with women. So it's not only a job, it's a sharing living, sharing life, because we eat with them, we go to the beach with them, and whatever we do is with women. So it's somehow that they can understand that we really care of them. And they understand that they are important for us. Sometimes, very often, they say, but nobody cares of me, or nobody has taken care of me during my life. So why you are doing this? But sometimes even the silence is important, because we always are used to talk, we have to go to say, you do this, do that, but no, sometimes only the present, even the silent present can make the change. When we are together, maybe you will see a woman that she's sad, and maybe there's no need to go and ask her what's wrong with you. Just being close to her, we'll get the time she will talk. So this is important, respect the time of any person, because our time is not their time. There's a word where in our project in Italy, they are called all kairos from Greek, because any women will get a kairos. Once I will share with you this history, which is very important for me. I was working in the detention center in the south of Spain, and I met a Nigerian younger. We suppose that she was underage, but anyway, she was there. And we were talking with her and trying to tell her, come, don't trust on those who told you, come to Spain. And then, okay, you know that we were telling her, maybe what we'll be doing after this will be sexual work, will be trafficking. And she said, no, because they told me I will be working as a babysitter. Okay, fine. Of course, we cannot, there was nothing to do. She was in the detention center. We just trying to prevent her of what could have be the future. But anyway, that was life. After 3 years, she came in the shelter where I was living. And it was so nice when we met, because we were just remembering the first time when we met. It was 3 years before, and when she told me, "Oh, you were right," and I said, "I could have been right, but your kairos, wasn't there yet. Now is your kairos." So the time came 3 years later, luckily. But anyway, this means that when we do street work, or when we meet the women in the clubs or in the flat or an apartment when they make prostitution, we just talk with them, because we are sure that any one of us has its time. So the time will arrive. And of course, if we don't put her in the center, means that we are not giving her the freedom to decide and to be free to decide what she wants to do. Of course, in our project, we are working like a holistic way, because of course there's some spirituality, because depending where we are and the country where we are working in, the spirituality has its importance. And also depending on the women that are with us. The environment, the situation, of course, physical health, social functioning, psychological and emotional well-being, exactly as the professor said before. So for us, care is a fundamental dimension of structure of being. Caring for women is more similar to sustaining, providing a point of support for them to gain momentum in managing their own life. That's what I was saying before. And then there is something that I would like to tell you, that care requires a watchful eyes, kind of understanding and pedagogical touch. Because we also need to know how to work with them, because it's not only a theory. Of course, before entering the congregation, I've studied years. People victim of trafficking, migration, all this, fine. But then sharing life with them is not only theory. So we should acquire also ourselves ways, a pedagogical touch and watchful eyes. It's because sometimes you cannot go to them or to talk with them about theory. Because when they reply, but I was doing this because they obliged me, or I was doing it because I need to eat myself and my children. So there's no theory against this. Which theory you can tell them when they need money to feed their family? So the approach has to be different. Because if we think about this, we say, of course, if she comes from an environment where there was no money, no food, nothing, we all know that to be hungry, anyone can do whatever. But then forgive. She has to forgive herself for what they've done. And then when she will be free, she can realize that there are other ways of living to feed their family. But we need to give them an opportunity to do this. Otherwise, if the only thing she knows to feed their family is prostitution, of course she will be doing this. So one important part of our mission is to provide them other opportunity of living. And also thanks to some foundation, one of them is Arise, of course, then can help them to have other opportunities. And this pass also for training, this also part of study, this also is part of our psychological part of our work, because I've seen it many times. It's not only a question to give them a job or to help them to find a job. If you don't stay well as a person, if you are not recovered, the following day you will lose your job, because your way of relating with people in your job, the way of you are working, does not express what you are, but you are still victim of what the past has caused to you. So this is something very, very important for us, because sometimes it's easy to say, okay, if we find for them a job, everything will be fine. Not at all. I've seen many, many cases of this. And also this is very important, because the self-employment, to help them to find their ways, is not only a question of do this and then will be this. No, it's a process. And this process takes time, as we all can understand. Before I was saying surname could be any of them. In these pictures, okay, you cannot see very well, but anyway, if we see here, this part it's black, or it's supposed to be black here. This part is bright. So this is the kairos that she received. Means that this is the past and this will be a future. So this represents exactly what we are doing. Trying to help her to understand that she is this part, not this part. The challenges that we always face in our work. Who really cares for me? Why do you people want to listen to my story? Will you be able to speed up, provide me legal? How will I be able to work without papers? Who will employ me even if I'm physically fit to work? And so many other challenges that we can add to this list. Because it's what we live on a daily basis. These are the questions that women always tell us. Because of the culture, because of the color of our skin, because of the language, if they have children or they don't have children. These are the questions that always, why do you people want to listen to my story? Why do you waste time listening to my story? Why you are there? Who really cares for me? If nobody, even my family, didn't, so why do you do? Or who will employ me? This is the big question. Where can I find a job? But anyway, we are there for that. So these three sentences, I think that show exactly what I'm trying to say. Freedom, liberation, and then Fratelli Tutti, anybody of us can know this. Freedom, liberation. Our time spent for them is not a wasting time. It's a time for them to recover. It's a time for them to be free. It's a time for them to understand that life is not always and only what they pass through. And I would also like to share some words of one of our educators told us. We have a routine that must be followed because in society they will require get up early, arrive on time, personal care. These are things that will really be useful to them because later on they will be demanded of the same. Recovering values such as affection, respect, and love is important. But for us, it's also very important the daily routines in the house, such as time dinner, time lunch, at such an hour that have to get up, keep leisure time on weekend, so that when they leave the project, they can face the everyday situation. Some stupid things. Of course, time we wake up, to tidy up your room, normal thing that we always do. But when they come to the project, they are not even able to do this. So we try to explain them that be on time. It's not because we want you to be on time. It's because the society requires to be on time. And at the very beginning, when we talk about these things that could be free things, they don't understand it. But because sometimes happens that we try to teach them these things to be in a different position. But our pedagogy is to do this with them. So we are always on time. We are always tied up our rooms. And so they see that it's not we ask them to do, but we are doing with them. So this makes the change. Do it with them. And this is what we also ask to the people who are working with us. Because not a question of only the sisters are doing, but if those who are working in our project, wherever and whatever they are doing, has to follow this. Do things with them. And this, I think, that this is also the key of the change. This is something that one woman said. And I think the most important thing is the last sentence. Trust is my biggest problem. I don't trust anybody anymore. I think there's no worse thing in life than not trust anybody anymore. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sister Luisa. That was a very inspiring presentation, and you really brought to life this pedagogy of encounter. You also stressed at the end something close to my heart, the importance of keeping to time and being on time. So without further ado, we shall move to our last presenter this morning, and this is Anna Weston. And Anna is a member of the Bakita Centre here at St Mary's, as well as being a lecturer at the St Mellitus College here in London. She actually did her MA in bioethics here at St Mary's. If that were not enough, to continue this theme of wholeness and integration, she is also a Pilates instructor and musician. And today she's going to talk, to end our morning, on her role as the director of the JAM network, where she uses creative expression and movement in her work with survivors of trafficking. So in this respect, Anna bridges what we've been doing this morning, looking at the possibilities of healing and this holistic view of the person, to what we're going to do this afternoon, where we'll move even more into this creative expression. I'll hand over to you, Anna.
Thank you so much for letting me be here. I feel a very small part of a big body, but I'm talking about the body, and it's good to have the tiny parts as well. And I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Carol Murphy for organizing this, and I just feel like Dr. Murphy epitomizes all that is so good about being an academic who lives it, embodies it. So I'm very grateful to her. So I want to look at, I am a philosopher by training and a body therapist. So I want to look at how the imagination can connect to the body, and a bit of a philosophy of the imagination that informs our very small network that we work with survivors in the UK. So the imagination is often defined as some ambiguity. It's wielded as a phenomenon through which the unseen is expressed in reality. It has the paradoxical power of bringing about new revelation or indeed further ambiguity. In the process of trauma healing, the imagination is often either criticized or held as a tool of impressive healing capacity through the embodied medium of the arts. In this short presentation, I want to use phenomenology to assess how the arts can be used as an instance of healing the wounds experienced from human trafficking. I want to explore how the arts can give us tools to reconstruct our field of perception. And the Archbishop was talking about movement, and that's so critical to I think, this theory and this practice. That includes the self as a victim and the wider world of relations. I will also aim to clarify the experience in order to connect conversations between artistic activism and phenomenological trauma theory to shed light on what it means to use the imagination as an embodied tool of recovery from trafficking. As a body-based practitioner, an artist, academic, and activist, I draw on my own experiences working with survivors of trafficking in the UK. And again, I mean, I'm not living in community. I just really admire the work of people here, the work of Bakita House, just the people I have great admiration for. Given my experience, I suggest that therapeutic approaches, such as those offered by imaginative arts-based activity and movement, offer ways of reconnecting with the lived body as an alternative approach to tending to the traumatic experience of trafficking. This enables the survivor to reconnect with her lived experience through the imagination and the living body in a way that transcends the limitations of language-based therapy alone. So what I'm saying is that language-based therapy is such an important practice in trauma healing, but I think we need to look at the body-based practices as well. I'm not advocating for either. I will suggest that bodied imagination enables the survivor to live reconstructed experiences of self even before she fully cognizes what that story is. As such, the imagination enables a living of future-oriented experience, even as the traumatic experience is still cognized as fragmented or silenced. So trauma, so I'm going to look at trauma in the body and then do a little philosophy of the body very quickly. And then I'm looking at bringing the body home, how healing in the imagination can be applied to survivors of trafficking. Okay, so trauma in the body, localizing trauma in the lived experience of the body has been furthered through the works of people like Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine, suggesting that language narratives need to connect to the bodied experiences of trauma. Van der Kolk says the overwhelming experience of trauma is split off and fragmented, experienced in the body, so that the emotions, sounds, images, thoughts, and physical sensations related to trauma take on a life of their own. And this connects to what Jewish philosopher Levinas said is a suffering or an undergoing, a continuous undergoing, that he says feels intrinsically useless for nothing, a basic senselessness. And for him, healing comes in the provision of an exit from this undergoing, this continual undergoing, which Van der Kolk talks about is in the physical sensations of the body. Merleau-Ponty helps us to understand this a little bit more. He says that we actually experience the world and ourselves through our bodies. He says we're conscious of the world through the medium of the body. And Ricoeur, another philosopher, you don't need to remember these names, but the self needs a subjective self, of a sense of self-continuity in this life. And so they're connecting the body and the sense of the world through the body with this sense of self-continuity. So I know who I am through my experiences as a living body, not just through my mind, but how I'm sensing the world around me. And that sense of myself has a continuity. So there's a continuity of how I'm sensing the world. Ricoeur says our own body is the very place, in the strong sense of the term, of belonging, thanks to which the self can place its mark on those events that are its actions. There's something that is myself that I belong in. And so when the trauma of the body, the part of the pain of this is this breaking off from my own sense of belonging and belonging in the world. In order to restore this, to bring back this sense of belonging, Merleau-Ponty suggests that in order to restore the experience of belonging in the world and belonging in myself, I want to restore this relational continuity to the world and to myself. I need to be able to reoccupy my own body state, my own subjectivity, my own body in this world, sense of sensation that isn't just fragmented and overwhelming and splits me off, but actually is continuous. And Ataria, who's done a lot of work on sex trafficking and sexual trauma in the body, says that often for an individual who has survived sex trafficking, the body itself can be experienced as a place of violence. This contrasts with what Ricoeur says, which says that our own body is our place of belonging and our relation of belonging to the world, where we have this continuity. You know, I'm the one who shows up today, and I was the one who had dinner yesterday, and it's my body, my sense of self that I'm bringing into this room, and it's my belonging, my own sense of belonging that I'm bringing in. But especially in sex trafficking and sex trauma, the body itself can be experienced as a place of violence. What's done to the body, and very intimately to the body, in sex trafficking. So the question for me has become, how do you bring that body home? How do we bring that sense? How do we restore a sense of belonging in ourselves and in the people that we're working with? And I suggest, because others have suggested it, that you can use the imagination to do that in a very powerful way. I think the Archbishop was talking about movement and a connection to others and dance. And I think there's something really powerful in this, because it's connecting to an otherness that is outside of the very lived physical pain reality that a person has experienced. And it's a connection to other people, etc. So this is where the imagination can enter in. And I know imagination can go anywhere. We can have, kind of crazy imaginations, but the imagination, Ricoeur suggests, connects our experiences to one another through the use of language, through the use of symbol, in myth and in metaphor. And it's actually, the imagination has the ability for us to bridge experiences with one another that are actually very different from one another. And so it can act, the imagination can act as, quote, a vast field of experimentation, or even a playing with hypotheses in the most varied and fantastic forms to produce an immense laboratory of solutions. Yes. So that's why I think the imagination can have a real role in healing, and in a very maybe ambiguous way there. And my suggestion is that this exploration of belonging, a reclaiming of belonging after this sense of Itaria's idea of a body being the experience, the place of violence for the individual, and what Levinas talks about the body's undergoing a sense of non-exit, an overwhelming, a fragmentation, all these things that contrast with belonging. The idea is that the imagination can help to explore bridges of possibility for connection with the body. And the imagination is not, what Ricoeur says, it's not a false explanation. It's not a, let's just imagine yourself other than you are. A false explanation by means of images and fables, like, I'm a Canadian woman, but I'm going to imagine myself, as a horse, from the 18th century. But it's not a false explanation, but it's a narration which relates events. It establishes forms of action, and it helps us to understand who we are in relation to the world around us. And this is, so the idea is that the imagination, it can go two ways. It can kind of make us into false explanations, etc., or it can be this place in which we start to explore our connection to the world in a way that we haven't experienced it before. And this is where I think the imagination can be a place of hope. And this is what Ricoeur talks about. He says the imagination can take on the impatience of hope because it allows us to imagine a reality that we have not experienced ourselves, a belief in spite of evil, he says. So how do we do imagination in a way that doesn't give us false explanations of reality, that doesn't, how do we do this in a helpful way? In a way that actually brings a body home into a sense of belonging in ourselves, a sense of belonging in community, takes on this impatience of hope in spite of suffering, in spite of the fragmentation, in spite of the actual physical pain, because a lot of people are in continuous physical pain because of what they've gone through. How do we do that? And this is where the JAM network, which JAM UK, which I direct, has sought to provide embodied experiences of the imagination for survivors of trafficking. Usually, the people that we've worked with have been women. Usually it has been sex trafficking. So there are specific experiences of the body that we want to have a container for. But what we try to do is provide activities to assist survivors of trafficking in bridging from their experience of trauma to a wider experience of the world in connection to other people. So we try to play with this idea of how do we develop alternative experiences of belonging. There are people who are doing amazing work in very practical care and social work, in working through immigration processes, and we just want to come alongside that because we can't do that. That's not our professional capacity. What we want to do is develop trauma-informed practices that mediate the arts-based disciplines that occur for participants. But the aim is for healing to occur in the outworking of the whole life story. So we've developed retreats for survivors where we bring in artists to work with survivors on pieces of art, not necessarily art therapy, but working with survivors as developing them as artists in their own right, as writers in their own right. For me, Pilates has been important as movers in their own right. And the creative and movement-based arts are used as a primary expression for the recovery of a life and the bringing the body back to itself as a place of belonging. The individual practice of the participants, the individual artistic or movement practice of the participants, is a manifest reintegration of the pieces broken in their unique trauma and the continuation of their life story. So we really want to emphasize the continuation of the life story. We want to develop their artistic practices so that they can integrate the trauma story into the beginning of the life story and the furthering of the life story. And so we've done that through titrated experiences of movement, through Pilates. We've done it through retreats focusing on imagination-based activities, but grounded in awareness of trauma theory, so gardening, cooking, painting, and music. And we want to develop this through an exploration of free agency through their own creative and movement-based processes, connecting them to their own lives as bodied beings, as living homes for themselves, not just as survivors, not just as victims, but reintegrating that whole life.
Thank you very much. Well, that was an absolutely special presentation, and a wonderful way of ending a brilliant morning. I think you started this morning with that wonderful, I know he was apologizing for giving a sermon, but it was a very inspiring speech by the Archbishop. And what the Archbishop said is so important is that in all this work of engagement, it has to be holistic. It has to bring in body, heart, mind, and spirit. And we've seen that in our four presenters this morning. Lastly, with Anna and the body, really bringing, I was sitting next to Anna when she was presenting, and she was bringing it physically into her body. I thought this is brilliant to behold. And then we heard of Sister Luisa's work. And, you know, that really, for me, brought back the heart, you know, the heart that's required in this work, and her complete devotion to dealing with this trauma. And then we started with Professor Papadopoulos' work, and that really fascinating opening up of the conversation and how we work with the mind, how the psychological, the psychotherapeutic language can liberate us, but can also trap us at other times. And finally, we have the spirit. And Luke's work reminded us of the importance of not just the spirit, but people like the religious themselves and how they bring that spirit into the work. So the integration of body, heart, mind, and spirit. And I think, you know, also Anna's given us laid the foundation for this wonderful exploration of the creative that we're going to look at this afternoon.